Well, hey, what's going on? Welcome into Chatterbox Reds off-season edition. Here's mid-October. Nick Kirby here. I'm joined by a special guest, Austin Layton. Austin's going to be helping us out with some off-season content, with some Reds content. Excited to have Austin joining the program today. We'll get to him in just a second. But as always, we are proudly sponsored by Deep South Commodities. DSC is a leader in renewable commodities for biofuel production, specializing in used cooking oil collection, aggregation, and sales. Visit www.deepsouthcommodities.com for more information. Thanks to John and his team over at DSC. Well, as mentioned, Austin Layton joining the program. Austin, how are you doing, my friend? Mid-October. Had some excitement so far in this offseason, but how you doing?
Hey, doing well. It's tough watching other teams in the playoffs, but I gotta admit it's kind of fun, especially the NL side of things. I've been watching ever since the Dodgers and the Padres series, and kind of been hooked since there, watching the Mets do their thing. But obviously, biased towards the Reds, wish they were in it, but it's still some fun baseball, and I'll take it how I can get it. But doing well and happy to be on. I appreciate it.
Yeah, that Lane Thomas home run for the Guardians kind of got me in my feels. I was like, Reds are going to have that moment. It's coming. It's going to happen soon. And just, man, like, what a moment. And that's the kind of thing to me, because there's always this talk like, well, if you don't win the World Series, it doesn't really matter. I think that is the most garbage take in baseball, because, like, the Guardians, they may get swept by the Yankees, but that matters, man. That moment, those fans being there, celebrating with each other, celebrating with their kids. They may not win the World Series, but they're going to remember that particular moment for the rest of their life. So again, I want the Reds to win a World Series one day. That's the ultimate goal. But a little bit of postseason success would mean a hell of a lot to me.
Yeah, if they can just win like the first round, that would be big news around here, at least in our lifetimes, it would feel like. So I would take that for sure. And I would certainly remember it, to your point.
Yeah. Well, Austin, tell everyone a little bit about yourself, kind of some of the things that you've done in the sports world, and why you wanted to help us out here a little bit on Chatterbox Reds.
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, I unfortunately probably just care about the Reds way too much for a team with their record in the past, few years. But no, background at least on me, I've done some sports broadcasting going back all the way to college, which unfortunately is a little bit longer ago than I feel like it is. Helped out. I went to Ohio State, so I did their student radio organization there, Scarlet and Gray Sports Radio. Actually did a show. We talked about this offline, but at the time, the way that we broadcasted it was on Ustream, which is just crazy to think about that, like, that's not even a thing anymore. But did a weekly show with a couple guys up there. I grew up in the Cincinnati area, so we actually catered it around Cincinnati sports, called it Queen City Sports Talk. So obviously hit on the Reds, the Bengals, and then just being at Ohio State, we certainly talked about the Buckeyes a bit. But then after that, after college, I actually took a part-time job with Fansided. I did a blog over there for Ohio State sports as well. I swear I know a lot about the Reds. I keep saying Ohio State, but it was a good time over there. Actually, I was the editor there for about a year, then ended up leaving just because the job I had at the time had some weird hours and I couldn't really do it justice how I wanted to. But a lot of fun. Love talking about sports. Saw you guys doing your thing for the past season at least, and just wanted to be a part of it. So glad to be here.
Yeah, well, awesome. Well, appreciate you taking some time to join us, and looking forward to having some fun conversation. All right, before we get into the meat of our show today, we gotta talk about Tito. We gotta talk about Terry Francona. I mean, this guy is everywhere. I don't know if they are really trying, or he or whoever, to show that he is 100% healthy and committed. Because I thought I did a lot of podcasts this summer. I think Tito's done more podcasts in the last 2 weeks than I did all year. I mean, this guy is just everywhere. Every other day I see him popping up on something. And, man, his personality, I knew it from living in Cleveland. I knew how much Reds fans were going to love him. I'm so excited that Reds fans are really starting to get to see him. And he's incredible. Like it's infectious. I have to watch every single thing, every interview that he does.
No, you're 100% right. It seems like, and it's way different, right? Because we're not used to David Bell going on, national podcasts or anything like that. Dan Patrick show, things like that for sure. So it's a nice change up, and I gotta, I love the hire. I guess to back up, I think, when it first came out, people were, targeting Skip Schumacher might be the guy, things like that, and that kind of set your bar of like, all right, well, the best guy we're going to get is Skip Schumacher apparently, and then out of left field, baseball pun intended, I guess, Terry Francona comes out. And apparently it's a connection he had with Marty Brennaman that kind of sealed the deal in the back door a little bit, which is cool. But no, you're 100% right. He's been all over the place. Literally earlier tonight, I was watching him on Sean Casey's The Mayor's Office podcast. And his personality, I think you hit on it too, is it's just very outgoing. He's exactly how I kind of take myself. I guess he mentioned he doesn't take himself too seriously, but he takes the game seriously, which I think is awesome. And it probably resonates a lot, with players. And his reputation, obviously, is as one of the best managers in the game. So I think, from that standpoint of being able to market the Reds, which, small market team, we don't really get that too often. I think it's awesome from that regard. But it's one of the few hires that I think just on reputation and name almost commands a respect from the clubhouse. And I think that, there's ways that going back to Skip Schumacher could have done that maybe just by his personality and, how he approached the game. But having a, manager that's won World Series and just been respected for decades, it seems like, I think is just going to be huge for the Reds. And I'm in love with the hire, man. I think it's great. We'll obviously have to put a team on the field, but I mean, we're going to hit on it later as there's not much else news for the offseason for the Reds, but this is one of the best things they could have done, I think.
Yeah, that Sean Casey podcast with him was just fantastic. I mean, if that doesn't get you excited for the Red season in October, still months away, I don't know what else will. That was just, it was incredible to watch. We did have some news today as we're recording this. There is no Redsfest this year, which is just such a bummer with Francona. Obviously, last year I got the privilege to do some interviews with our partner 1410 Wing AM in Dayton. Got to interview our former manager David Bell, who I just feel bad for David Bell. Like, and I know he's getting paid a lot of money, but man, you get replaced by Terry Francona. I mean, it's just like a kick right in the face. But yeah, no Redsfest this year. That's a real bummer. I guess the Duke Energy Convention Center is under renovations and they didn't want to move it. I don't know. I kind of feel like, especially when you get Francona and you've got some energy in this fan base, I really wish they would have found a way to do something. Maybe they'll surprise us. I saw some people, maybe they'll beef up the Caravan a little bit more. Maybe they'll be able to get some higher profile players. Maybe Elly De La Cruz will go on the Caravan. Maybe they'll beef that up a little bit more than usual to kind of make up for it. But Austin, have you ever been to Redsfest before?
Yeah, I went a lot when I was super young, and my dad and I would go seemingly every winter for a good string of years. And like I on some of these episodes later, I got to show you, I've got a whole like boxes of bobbleheads. We used to go to bobblehead games during the season. And then my dad and I would take bobbleheads to Redsfest and trade them for ones that we didn't have, essentially. Yes. So I've moved like 3 times, in the past like 10 years, and I keep just shuffling these boxes of bobbleheads everywhere. But yeah, it's a lot of fun waiting in line for autographs. I got pictures with guys like Norris Hopper and Brandon Phillips from way back in the day that like still come up in my random photos. I'm just like, guys like David Ross. So yeah, love Redsfest. To your point, I'm surprised they couldn't find a better place, put it for this year or something like that, just to, engage with the fans. But who knows? Maybe they're cross-cutting. They didn't want to do it. Who knows? But it's disappointing they're not doing it for sure.
I actually met Francona. I got to like stand in line and shake his hand and get a picture with him and my wife up here in Cleveland. And they do their Guardians Fest at the stadium. So like I don't know. The Reds have done it so much longer that it's so much bigger than most other teams. I know like the Cubs have their Cubs Fest, which is its own thing, but in terms of small market teams, I would imagine there's no one that even comes close to garnering the kind of attention that the Reds do. So I don't know if there's too much of they've built it up too much to where there just isn't really a spot that they feel like they could do it justice. So I don't know. We'll see. I am bummed about that. But is what it is. We'll move on. All right. Well, Austin, I when we started talking, I said, you know what, you got to come up with some topics for me because I did 157 games and my brain's about fried. I need some fresh ideas. I need some fresh thoughts for some content this offseason. And so you had an idea of something that would be a fun conversation for this week.
Yeah, and going, I guess, off of the Tito hire and just kind of, I was game planning like next steps for the Reds, right? And it's a weird period where you got the playoffs going on, so we can't like make a trade with people. There's no free agents outside of like the minor leagues. There's some movement there, but I'm just trying to game plan. All right, we're going into winter meetings is kind of the next thing for the Reds probably. What are some of the moves that they could potentially make? And I was thinking about it through the lens of like, in a perfect world, I don't think the Reds need to make a lot of trades to be successful next year. I think they have a pretty good core, and honestly, I think free agency is going to be the better market for them to, try to make some moves. Just because, one, I think they have some cash available, as much as they maybe don't want to tell us that, but also just the guys that we got a lot of guys that are under team control, and I wouldn't necessarily want to get rid of that just to try to get something better and give up, multiple years of somebody that's relatively cheap and under our control too. But yeah, without teasing it anymore, the topic that I came up with was kind of going through the players that I think the Reds, quote unquote, could or should be shopping throughout the offseason. And I've got a few guys. There's certainly a list of, like I said, there's some untouchables like Elly and McLean. like, if the Reds are, and Nick Kroll likes to say they'll listen to offers about anybody, but I don't know if they would seriously consider any offers for those guys. And I don't know if I seriously would consider any offers for those guys, no matter who, they wanted to send back to us. But I wanted to get into, I guess, some guys that either through, having too many guys in similar positions, or maybe, paying them too much for what I think we're getting production wise. Just some guys that came to mind, but glad to kind of hammer that out with you, and obviously see if you had any different ones too. But I got a few guys in mind, at least, that I would start it off with.
Yeah, I'm very much in that Nick Kroll school of thought of I always would listen to everyone. Now, listening on Elly De La Cruz, I mean, I think a team would have to trade their entire top 30 prospects, plus maybe a couple big leaguers for Elly De La Cruz. So, I mean, like, there's no one that's ever going to give me enough for Elly De La Cruz, I don't think, but I would always listen. There's no reason not to listen. I mean, I guess we could go through the close to untouchables, the guys that you would have to not just, you'd have to have like all four of your car doors blown off, not just one. So obviously Elly De La Cruz would be at the top of the list. I think that this one might surprise people. I think that Matt McLean would be pretty high, just because I don't think his value is high enough to where any team's gonna give you enough. So he's kind of a weird one there. Hunter Green would be there. Burns would probably be there. That's about it for me.
Yeah, and admittedly, I was kind of looking at maybe the 40-man more so than our prospects in the minors too. But I even put I have Rhett Lauder in that consideration of guys that I just think are pretty crucial to our success next year. And obviously we have Rhett under some pretty good control with him just coming up last year after we drafted him. But and I guess the other ones that I had rounding out maybe surprise people, maybe not. I've got Spencer Steer on there as a guy that I think is pretty essential to our core. I think he was down this year, but with his versatility, I think if he can get anything back to what he was doing 2023, I'm putting him on that list. And this is probably, I guess, maybe the most lightning rod of all of them, but I got Jonathan India on there too. I just think he's for the Team America that the Reds are kind of going with, America's team. I think he provides a lot, just for not only back end kind of team morale and in the clubhouse, and honestly, he might be the most tenured Red at this point, unless I'm forgetting somebody. But I just feel like, with the way he honestly even hit towards the end of last year, not that the sample size of other Reds was really giving him much competition, but his bat, and I think, you kind of have to get into that conversation of, all right, where is he going to play? Because I think we're back to the same logjam that we were at the beginning of last year, and thinking, are we moving into India into the outfield and that type of thing? But that was rounding out my list of at least untouchables, but similar to yours, I guess.
Ironically enough, I think Spencer Steer for me would be at the top of the list of players I would be most willing to.
Okay.
So we have a little bit of a disagreement there, which I guess is fun. It's good not to just completely be on the same side. I actually think I know Jonathan India has been, like you mentioned, the lightning rod, and for so long it's made sense that he's the odd man out. But I have a take here. I think that right now, Jonathan India should be a lot higher on the pecking order than Spencer Steer. I mean, you just look at what the two players did this past season. I mean, Jonathan India had a 108 WRC plus. Spencer Steer had a 96 WRC plus. And I know India 2023, 2022 was, right just below league average, but he has that one rookie season, just like Spencer Steer has that one great rookie season. So I don't really know why in a lot of people's minds, Spencer Steer's here and Jonathan India's here. And also, I mean, Jonathan India, as poor of a defender as I think overall he is, I still think he's probably a better defender than Spencer Steer. And I at least have the unknown with Jonathan India. If you send him out to left field, maybe he could be great. I know that Spencer Steer is not going to be great in left field.
Yeah, and with Steer too, that it's kind of a weird double-edged sword, because he's not like great at any position defensively, but he can also play a lot of defensive positions, which is, it's a good thing. But then to your point, it's like he's not excellent at any of them. But no, and that was kind of the fun thing as I was making this, list, if you will. It's like you almost want guys to be good so you can get a good trade return for them. But then it's almost like, well, we also want to trade the guys that we don't think are good, but then nobody actually wants them either. So it's kind of a weird position to be in. But no, and I mean, honestly, this stuff's more fun for me than anything, but I could see arguments both ways for sure.
For me, looking at who you should consider trading, I think you should be looking at every single player that is below average defensively. And you need to, I think the Reds would be wise to move away from some of them and bring in some better defenders, because I continue to believe that is one of the Reds' biggest problems. I think that the Reds' defense in 2024 was a bigger problem than their offense. And I know a lot of people go, I watch this team every day. They were terrible. I'm like, well, go look at what the Cleveland Guardians offense did. And the Reds were arguably equal to them. And they're playing the ALCS right now because they had an elite defense. And I actually broke it down here. So the Reds had minus 30 defensive runs saved as a team this year. To be top 15 in baseball, so just to be league average or better, that was at plus 17. So that's a 47 run difference. So the Reds lost 47 runs on defense throughout the year. That's a lot of runs. A stat that I like to use, weighted runs created plus. A lot of people believe it's the best overall offensive statistic to use. You can also just use it as weighted runs created, which is just a bulk number instead of the 100 is average type scale system. And the Reds ended up with 666 weighted runs created, which is a funny number to end up at. The top 15 in baseball was 696. There's only a 30 run difference to be in the top 15. And when I look, Austin, at this offense, at this team, I see a lot more potential in 2025 for guys to improve offensively. Like, I think there was a lot of guys that just had bad years, and they're not all going to come back up. But I think there's a lot more upside just swinging the bat than there really is defensively. Like, I know Matt McClain, if he can stay healthy, he can't even stay healthy in the Arizona Fall League right now. If he can stay healthy, he would drastically improve this defense. If TJ Friedel's able to stay healthy for close to a full season, he would drastically improve his defense. But both of those guys, I'm not counting on either one of them to play every day. So I continue to really beat that drum, and that's why personally, I would be completely okay with moving on from one of Steer or India. Everyone else is kind of like okay, but I just want the Reds to bring in someone that is great defensively. Can we just have one player? And I know Elly's going to get there, I believe, but can we just have one player that's just a great defensive player that you can really count on?
Yeah, and that's the thing too, because it's like you feel like at least hitting is more of a hot and cold thing, but defense should at least be pretty consistent. And yeah, to your point, I mean, guys like Steer took a step back last year from what we really kind of needed them to do. Friedel for health reasons too, but he actually ended up getting a decent amount of at-bats when it was all said and done. But I just don't think he could get maybe in the streak that he wanted to. But yeah, no, I mean, I think as in I guess the double side of any trade is what do you get in return for these guys? And admittedly, I didn't play that out a lot in this projection, at least just because that would take forever. But I think there's some, at least going along your thought, I do agree that the Reds, if at all possible, and maybe in this world of analytics, they really don't, but they need to get rid of, especially out in the outfield, the platoon situations and the corner outfields. I think, one, it doesn't allow guys to get, in a good streak of hitting that, they can get consistent numbers. But, when you're cycling guys in, not that I think that we should trade him just because I don't know if we'll get much in return, but guys like Will Benson, where, I mean, just leading the league in strikeouts and can't really hit both ways, obviously, or even Jake Fraley to some extent. I think he had great numbers. He batted 277 for his batting average, but, he can't hit both pitchers. It's just, it gets the Reds in kind of a weird position where they're almost having to platoon these guys. And if you could get somebody that can at least hit, decent both ways, I think it would make a lot of things easier for Tito. That's for sure.
Yeah. Well, thankfully, like Will Benson still has minor league options, so you can send him down. He's still on making league minimum. A guy like Jake Fraley, he does still have options, but he's making a decent amount of money. I think his projection was maybe 3 or 4 million off the top of my head for next year. Kind of hard to justify sending him down to AAA. So again, like Benson, like I keep seeing, we got to get rid of Will Benson. I'm like, Will Benson could just go sit in AAA all year if he doesn't work out. Like he doesn't have to hold a roster spot. And I think Will still has some upside that he's had one really good season and one really bad season. So let's hope that, we find out who he really is in 2025. But I don't know, the platoon, it really backfired on the Reds this year just because none of the players played well, other than really, I guess, Stuart Fairchild played pretty well on his FM, but Fairchild got hurt a lot. And Fairchild, honestly, we kind of talk about Matt McLean and Friedel and their injury history. Fairchild's gotten hurt an awful lot for a guy that doesn't play every day. So he's kind of in that category as well. I don't know. I understand why people are so frustrated, upset with like the platoons and are so over it. But 3 of the 4 teams in the playoffs that are still left have a platoon spot in their lineup.
I guess platooning's good if both, guys that you're platooning are actually good to your point. It makes it a little bit better.
Yeah, well, the Reds just it felt like every guy they tried to throw in a platoon spot really flopped. I mean, even some of their options, like I think going into the year, I think the Reds were really hoping that guys like Hurtubise and Blake Dunn could even fill a side of the platoon spot. Neither one of those guys played well. It just felt like every single guy that, okay, he had some upside we could try. Maybe there's something there. Felt like none of those guys worked out in 2024.
Yeah, except for like the week of Reese Hines, maybe you get him up there, but we're just banking on that to happen to carry the team.
The week of Reese Hines, yeah. Oh, Hines is an interesting player too this offseason. I would not be shocked if he got moved this offseason. He's the one guy that I think I could see potentially getting moved. But Austin, who's your top trade candidate this offseason?
So I think for this one, it's probably a unanimous, at least maybe among the fans, that they would like to get rid of this guy. But I think and it maybe not. You have to tell me if I'm wrong. But I also think you're going to have to find a team that's willing to basically match you in giving up this type of player. And maybe you know who I'm talking about, but Jamer Candelario comes to mind. Obviously, we talked about health issues with the other guys, and I think that certainly is a big factor in Jamer's season last year. But underperformed, his kind of career numbers that we were expecting when we signed him for 3 years, $45 million. And that's a big reason that I'm kind of hoping that we can find somebody that's willing to trade that salary. And I think maybe you've talked about it in the past, you kind of have to find a team that is willing to kind of unload a bad contract for you to basically match what we want to do in unloading a bad contract. Our deal with the LA Dodgers many years ago with Homer Bailey and Matt Kemp and Puig and all those guys comes to mind. But I think, if Jamer can have a rebound year, kind of like a lot of the guys that we've been talking about, I think he could definitely have a role in this team, especially, third base, DH type of thing. But at this point, I just don't know for $15 million a year if basically we can find similar production out of somebody way cheaper. And, if that 15 million that we trade up, give away for Jamer comes back with a, innings eater guy that we can add to our rotation, I think I'm okay with that. Especially, and we're doing a lot of hopeful, wishful thinking here, but if guys like McLean stay healthy, we just have a log jam in the infield, especially if India is still around, especially if CES is back. So I just, guys like that come to mind, at least for the top of my list.
Yeah, I certainly wouldn't be against Candelario. I still thought I'd hope that Candelario could be a useful player for the Reds in 2025. I'm pretty confident that he'll bounce back, but I don't want to say there's no way, but I have a hard time believing that he's going to be worth that $15 million price tag as a first baseman DH. The only way I think he's going to be able to be worth $15 million is if he magically returns to being a good defender this offseason, because he was so bad he became unplayable at third base. And that was the big sticking point of bringing him in, was that he had the ability to play third base. And that with Marte's struggles, now third base has become such a critical position for the Reds. And the guy they signed to kind of be that backup option if Marte didn't pan out. And I still have hope in Marte, but I don't think you could go into spring training with him penciled in the lineup if you're seriously trying to compete. That's where Candelario just the contract. It's even I think he could be a solid player next year and still not be worth that contract. I have an idea. I don't know if the Cardinals would do this just because of how bad it would be optics wise. But the Cardinals have made it very clear they're going to cut money this offseason. They're trying to trim some payroll. Sonny Gray is owed $25 million in 2025 and $35 million in 2026. Then has a $30 million club option in 2027 that has a $5 million buyout. So essentially, oh boy, I make myself do math. That's $65 million that you're guaranteed to Sonny Gray over the next 2 years, where Jamer Candelario is $30 million, including his buyout in 2027. So could the Reds strike a swap where maybe the Reds have to eat a little bit of the salary, they throw in some more money? Maybe they throw in a prospect, because that's what St. Louis is ultimately trying to do to make that happen. I would think if I was St. Louis, I would definitely be wanting to get some sort of prospect back to make it sell better to your fan base as to why you're doing this. But that's the kind of deal, and you would alluded to earlier, a swap of a bad contract. Sonny Gray's not a bad contract, but he's a very expensive contract. I don't think a lot of people realized when Sonny Gray signed that contract in 2024, the Cardinals only paid him $10 million. He only earned $10 million last year. Year two's $25 million. Year three's $35 million. So the Cardinals really got out of that. I've already gotten past the easy part of that contract. So that to me would be such an easy swap that would make so much sense. But there may even be a lesser pitcher that is an innings eater, like you said, to where it's not someone that's great, but you can never have too much pitching. We find that out every single year, it feels like. And I do think the Reds need a veteran starter, even if they bring back Nick Martinez.
Yeah, and we know the Reds were supposedly interested in Sonny Gray before last year, right? I mean, and I think the fans would be, I would think, pretty receptive to him. I know maybe he didn't have the best year last year. I'd have to probably look at his stats more, but I would certainly be cool with something like that. I think, to your point too, I mean, it's hard, right? Because you don't want necessarily a bad backloaded contract on this team either, because I think, just knowing the Reds historically, they will take any excuse to not add more money if they can. But I think, to your point, I mean, we had our whole starting rotation hurt last year, so we can't really ever have enough pitching, but that's makes sense to me.
Yeah, Gray made 28 starts, 3.84 ERA. Obviously, that in itself is pretty quality pitcher. But if you look a little deeper, like his fielding independent pitching, 3.12, his xFIP, 2.82. So there's a lot of signs that point towards Sonny Gray due for some positive regression. That a lot of what happened last season probably wasn't his true form. His strikeouts actually went up quite a bit. His strikeouts were almost up, where there were actually more than 2 batters per 9 innings. And Sonny Gray, for as much as he kind of felt like a guy that was always kind of getting hurt, look at the last 4 years. 26 starts, 24 starts, 32 starts, 28 starts. Now, it's only one, I guess, completely full season, but that's not one season where he was out for a big chunk of the year. I mean, if the worst season you're getting is 24 starts out of a guy that's going to be a well above average pitcher, he's proven that he's been able to stay a little bit more healthy than maybe his reputation. Again, he'll be in his age 35 season, then his age 36 season the year after, and 37 if you were to pick up that option. But again, this is just an idea, but I could see this being one that actually could make sense for both sides.
Yeah, and while you're saying that too, it almost reminds me of kind of part of the reason we got Montas last year, for kind of that veteran presence to maybe mentor a young rotation. Now, you could also argue that maybe Montas already mentored Hunter Green all that he needs to, and now Hunter Green's, a former All-Star, right? But I think you can never have too much of that. We were always going to have kind of young guys coming up, so I think that adds value, obviously, to it too. So I like it. I think in the grand scheme of things, I mean, we really kind of need to just look at the Reds as almost like, how can they make the best out of still having pretty low resources, just because we don't know how the whole Bally thing's going to roll out. And, just historically being a small market, we got to be resourceful. I think that would be a solid move.
Anyone on the pitching side that you think might be a decent option to at least, field some calls on?
Yeah, I kind of bounced. I didn't put these guys on my actual list. Not that this is like a national list going out or anything. I was thinking through guys like Ashcraft or Abbott, things like that, to where they've shown flashes, and more so, I guess, Ashcraft comes to mind, of maybe shows flashes, but also regressed a little bit more than you would hope. And I think a little bit had to do with injury for him last year too, if I remember. But those guys, I didn't ultimately put them on my list, at least from the starting pitching side, just because I think, they're still so young, they're still cheap, we still have control for them. And, the flashes that they've shown, I think, wishful thinking, I think they could, do a lot better than they maybe performed last year. But the biggest thing is health with these guys. And maybe that's, universal for all teams of starting pitching. But these guys, a lot of these guys haven't hit their, full major league season of innings before, and they're kind of still feeling through that, I think, is a little bit of it. But I didn't have anybody else, at least on the starting pitching side, that I really was wanting to move at this point. The one guy I did have in the bullpen, and I'm eager to see your thoughts, was our pal Fernando Cruz. I didn't know if you would think the same thing with me, but I really think his splitter is nasty, right? The thing for me is he seemingly had a stretch, and I have to look at the numbers to get the actual stats on it. But last year, I mean, he had a rough go of it towards the end of the year. And I would always joke with my friends, it seems like he would come in and load the bases just so he could get out of a bases loaded jam almost. But I think, just with the hype of his pitch, and maybe, we don't get anything big back for him, but I just felt like he would be a name that would maybe garner some interest from other teams. But I'm eager to hear your thoughts on it too.
Certainly would be against trading a reliever that's 34. I mean, if you get a quality offer back for that pitcher, you probably trade him just about every time. I just don't know if he's at the peak value because of how much he struggled down the stretch. Now, maybe there's a team that just says, man, that pitch is so good. We think we can really harness it all. And I think this could also be something that could go with Graham Ashcraft. Where Graham Ashcraft on the surface, you'd be like, you don't want to sell this guy now. You're selling way low on him. But there may be a team that says, you know what? We won't give you the full dollar, but we'll give you 80 cents on the dollar for Graham Ashcraft because we think we can get that full dollar back. But again, if someone's willing to give a substantial value back for Cruz, if someone's willing to give a substantial back even for a guy like Diaz, I'm all for it. But I just don't know if there's enough teams that are going to give up big prospects for relievers, especially one that's as old as Fernando Cruz. Diaz not old, but he's 28. He's had some inconsistencies. So I'm not against it. I don't see a team giving me enough back to warrant it, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, and the only other guy that I was thinking through that I forgot to mention earlier too is Nick Lodolo. I think the ceiling's as high as anybody could be with that guy. Just obviously injuries have kind of been the issue. But do you bank on that if you're the Reds? I mean, do you think that, he's going to have that healthy year next year where he can pitch, the whole season or at least 75% of it? But I mean, it's another guy that they've got. I mean, we talked about it on offense. These guys that show flashes of just greatness and then for whatever reason get derailed with, blisters on their finger for Nick Lodolo and things like that. It's like you just left scratching your head of them putting it together. But at least on the Lodolo side, I mean, I think you would definitely get some interest from teams just based on his kind of stuff that he's shown. But it's another guy that I think, if healthy, I mean, he's going to be a huge part of our core essentially too, which is the flip side of all trades, I guess.
Yeah, I do think. I mean, I think there'll be a heavy interest for a guy like Nick Lodolo making basically nothing with the upside that he has. I feel like what happened with Chris Sale is the ultimate red flag of not doing that deal. Last year, the Red Sox trade Chris Sale to the Braves. They throw in $17 million for the guy that's going to win the Cy Young this year. They paid the NL Cy Young winner $17 million because he always got hurt. He never could stay healthy. And what does he do in Atlanta? He stays healthy. The prospect that they get back, Von Grisham, what did he do in 31 games? He had a .190, 246 on base percentage, 28 WRC plus, atrocious for the Red Sox. So, and he's still young, but he's only 23. But so far, that trade looks like an absolute disaster for the Red Sox. And I just can see that with the Reds. I mean, you trade Nick Lodolo, maybe he gets hurt, and he keeps getting hurt, and the same trajectory keeps going on, and his career is just derailed. And you get a great prospect back, and you go, see, we told you. Maybe he's top 5 in the Cy Young next year. If Nick Lodolo stays healthy for a full season, I think he has a legitimate chance of being an all-star caliber pitcher, getting Cy Young votes. So I don't know. That's one of those. We talk about trades. Sometimes we don't talk about just how much a lot of them are just a gamble. I mean, you're putting your money down at the casino and you're hoping it hits black, but it's a 50-50 shot.
Yeah, and especially with pitching, right? I mean, that's kind of, and especially if guys are on long-term deals, I think that's even bigger risk, of course. But no, that would be a very Reds thing to happen, is us trade away Nick Lodolo and he just wins the Cy Young. You'd probably watched Weaver for the Yankees closing games, stuff like that just happens. It's like this guy couldn't even get out of the first inning. Well, actually, he'd always get out of the first inning, give up 5 runs, and do pretty good the next couple innings with us, I feel like. But no one ever thought to put him in the bullpen, get rid of that. Now he just lights out for the Yankees. But
we mentioned it several times on Chatterbox Reds last year. Check the tapes. Me and Trace were both in agreement. The Reds should try this guy in the bullpen. I have no idea why they didn't.
Or at least he was an opener, right? Sorry to cut you off, but yeah.
I have no idea why they didn't even try it. They gave this guy start after start after start. They were paying him money. And why did they not just try him in the bullpen? I mean, they had to call up guys in September that had no business being in the big leagues in the bullpen. That to me was wild. I don't really understand that. Austin, let's wrap up our trade talk here with I want you to give me, and it doesn't have to be like some big specific order, but your top 3 or 5 guys that you actually think are most likely to get traded this offseason. So maybe like a top 3.
Okay. So the one that comes to mind, I don't know if I necessarily rank this at the top of guys that are likely to, but just because he had a history with the Guardians and Terry Francona, Will Benson, we got him last year, obviously or 2 years ago, I guess at this point, from the Guardians. We don't know. I've seen articles that are like, oh, he's clearly going to be moved because Terry Francona didn't like him. I've seen no indication of that, so I don't know if that's necessarily the case. But I also think he's a guy that doesn't necessarily fit in with this team, if he is going to have a year like he had last year. So I think, guys like that just have to be not necessarily because we'd get a lot of value back for him, but just because they've kind of seemingly run their course with the Reds. But I also look at a guy like you mentioned him earlier, Stuart Fairchild. If TJ Friedel is going to be your everyday center fielder, or at least, if he's healthy, he could be. I don't know if Fairchild, I should say, has much of a position with this team. Now, I think he's a good backup. I don't think, you want to rely on him every day, but I still think he showed some flashes last year of just speed and some decent hitting power, and range in center field too. But if I had to give another one on a guy that I think will be traded, I'm trying to think, because I'm trying to think too of the guys that are going to like opt out potentially too and just not come back. But the only other guy that really would come to mind for me, it's tough. I think, could we pick a guy like Ty France or something like that I think would get traded? But no, I think he still fits in if CES comes back. But I don't know. That's a tough one for me. Who would you put in your top 3, I guess?
I actually think Fairchild is one, and I've been one of the biggest world Stuart Fairchild fans. But Fairchild is out of options, whereas a guy like Benson can go down, as I said, can go down to the minor leagues all year. So there's just no need to move Benson unless you're getting anything back. I don't really covet a 40-man roster spot. I mean, the Reds, look at some of the players that were on the Reds 40-man roster during last season. I think they can survive with stashing Will Benson in the minor leagues. But Fairchild is out of options. I could see a guy like Blake Dunn maybe replacing his role as a younger guy that's going to be cheaper and has options. He can go up and down next year where Fairchild can't. So I think he's high up on that list. I do think Candelario is up there. I think if the Reds could find that partner, I think they would jump at the opportunity just because I don't think he fits anywhere with what their plans were for him. Their plans were for him to play third base, and he can't play third base. So I think he is. I think Jake Fraley might be up there depending on what his market looks like, just because he's going to start getting a little bit more expensive in arbitration. I don't want to move on from Jake Fraley just because I feel like, man, he had the worst season of his career, and he still like had a really good batting average, and it just feels like it just feels like he just has to fix some small parts of his game that just weren't working, and he had all these extenuating circumstances that made me think, man, he's such an easy bounce back candidate. But because he's a platoon player, I think you have to throw him in there. Ty France, I think, is going to get non-tendered, so I don't think that's even going to be an option. The non-tender deadline's next month. The projection for him was like $8 million. I was thinking it was going to be a lot lower. And those guys over at MLB Trade Rumors that do those arbitration projections, they're pretty good. They get that pretty close. So I don't think he's even going to be on the roster spot. I could see a situation, though, where the Reds re-sign Ty France. They did it with Kyle Farmer, where they non-tendered Kyle Farmer back in 2021, 2022. And they re-signed him like an hour later. They said, hey, what you're making in arbitration, we just don't think that we can justify that, but we want you to stay. And they found a lower number, and they went ahead and signed him. I could see a situation like Ty will give you $5 million. You liked it here. You don't have to go through a free agency. I could see that. Now on the pitching side, I think Graham Ashcraft is the one guy that I think is the most likely to get moved. Just because reading between the lines, it felt like there might have been some disconnect with Ashcraft and Derek Johnson and the organization when they sent him down, and then he got hurt in the second opinion. I could see Ashcraft getting moved. I think he's the one guy that when I look at this pitching staff top to bottom, I think trying to put on my Reds front office cap, I think he's the one guy that I think I could see them maybe selling low on just because, all right, we want to move on. But I don't know. On the pitching side, it's hard for me to give up on pitchers just because I think the Reds are nowhere close to having enough pitching right now in their organization, especially after we now know Aguiar and Williamson are out for the year. I think they need to get some more pitching. I think that we could very easily look up in mid 2025, and as I said many times during the year, the pendulum swings. 2023, it was the Reds pitching stinks. This offense is incredible. We got to get the pitching. And then a year flips, and it's this offense stinks. We gotta, we have plenty of pitching. I think it's a very good chance it swings back. So I don't want to move on from any pitchers, and I'm not necessarily saying I want to move on from Graham Ashcraft, but I do think he's at the top of my list of guys that I think could get moved.
Yeah, and there's talk. I mean, you've heard it probably from guys like Jeff Brantley that think he'd be a better fit in the bullpen than a starter, and maybe they try that. I don't know. But yeah, to your point, it seems like it was a very weird demotion last year when he went down, and just seemingly, I don't know, it just seemed like there was a lot of weird stuff that happened with that. And it's weird too because he was part of their kind of big three with Lodolo and Green at one point, you thought, for the future, and then it just didn't pan out. So we shall see. But yeah, that's the fun thing about all this. I mean, like we kind of hit on at the beginning, I think it's like ideally you probably don't trade a lot of these guys unless they're just like out of options, and really free agency is probably going to be the bigger market for those. And we can certainly talk about that at some point too, down the road once kind of the free agency market pans out more, I guess, so to speak. But it's always fun to game plan this stuff. That's why I wanted to bring it up. I think, we're basically in hopeful Red fan mode right now with the new manager and just kind of waiting for it all to progress. So cool little exercise we did.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we wrap this up today, I did want to just kind of give a quick update on what's going on out in the Arizona Fall League. So the Glendale Desert Dogs, that's our affiliate that the Reds share with, I think, 4 other teams. They lost today, the Wednesday as we're recording this, 13-11. They're now 5-3 on the year. Connor Phillips, who looked so good and got such great reports from his first start 2 did not go well. 2 1/3, 6 hits, 8 runs, gave up 2 homers. Now that league has had some crazy offensive numbers. But again, a little disappointed to see Phillips struggle after having kind of so much hope at the end of his season in AAA and then his first start out in the Arizona Fall League. But Christian Encarnacion Strand continues to play really well. Walked twice on Wednesday, hitting 429, OPS almost at 1,100 for him. Edwin Arroyo was also playing really well. 2 more hits today, hitting the ball really hard, putting up some really high exit velocity numbers, hitting 353, 860 OPS. He's a guy to watch. I don't think he's going to be in the opening day roster, but if you had to make me bet, I would bet that Edwin Arroyo will be on the big league roster at some point in 2025. Tyler Callahan was 1 for 4, 294 average, 749 OPS. He did walk twice. The biggest downside so far continues to be Matt McClain. He's not been in the lineup the last 2 games. Now, I've heard that he's okay. It's nothing a big deal. But again, it's just like, couldn't he just give me, Matt, please, I just need you to stay healthy for 2 weeks to the Arizona Fall League so I can feel good about it. There's just another unfortunate thing for Matt McClain. Again, I don't think it's anything serious. I think it's completely precautionary. But again, anything with Matt McClain obviously is going to get fans, concerned just because of the track record. And man, if there's one player, Austin, we'll wrap this up with maybe your thoughts on this. If there's one player that just how his 2025 turns out can swing the Reds one way or the other, it feels like it's Matt McClain.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you could easily make the argument that he was our best player in 2023. Small sample size, of course, but I think you're 100% right. But even CES, the guy that you hit on too there, I mean, he was projected to be kind of our big middle of the lineup power bat. So, I mean, if he can get, I don't know if he'll sway the team, but I mean, if we can get obviously better than we got from him last year, I think it's huge. And I think the Reds are kind of banking on it from an organization standpoint. But both of those guys, yeah, just get some reps in, stay healthy, go to the offseason, at least kind of close 2024 on your year kind of on a high note and get ready for spring training.
Well, Austin, this has been a lot of fun, my friend. Thank you so much for taking some time to join us, talk some baseball here in mid-October. I hope that you had a good time.
Hey, I had a great time. It's good to talk Reds. I'm in some group chats with some guys that, gave up on the season when the Reds are playing, and I'm texting them like, you guys clearly aren't watching the game. So it's good to have some people that are at least as crazy about it than I am, and looking forward to doing some more.
Well, again, as always, appreciate everyone tuning in today. Got all kinds of great content on Chatterbox Sports. As mentioned, kind of do Chatterbox Reds when the spirit moves. I'm not going to say we're going to do a podcast every Monday and Wednesday. I want it to be centered around some real conversations, some news when it happens, as opposed to just trying to fill shows, because I don't think that's very genuine. And we want to have some good content. We'll have plenty of content, but I'm not going to commit to anything. But we do have a lot of other things that are committed here at Chatterbox Sports. Of course, Off the Bench, 10 a.m. to noon on Chatterbox Sports on YouTube. It's also available everywhere you get podcasts. Check that out. Guys do a great job with that. Justin Kenner hosts that. Lots of NFL talk. Always Off the Bench, 10 a.m. to noon, Chatterbox Sports on YouTube, and then also available everywhere you get podcasts. Dialed in with Tom Brenneman. Sources tell me, sources being that I got to finish making the graphic for tomorrow's show. Tom has a new show debuting at noon tomorrow on Chatterbox Sports on YouTube. So be sure to check out Dialed In with Tom Brenneman. Chatterbox Bengals has really been picking up. Jacob Tissett has been hosting that. They're doing a full live stream for every Bengals game, start to finish. Jacob's on there the whole time, talking, yapping, doing a little bit of play-by-play, even kind of helping you enjoy the game. So that's live on YouTube during every game, but then they're also doing some shows. Our friend Craig, who's helped us a lot out here at Chatterbox Reds, Craig is co-hosting their post-game show after the game ends, and they're also doing shows on Tuesday and Thursday night on YouTube. And Chatterbox Bengals also available everywhere you get podcast. And last but certainly not least, Chatterbox Bearcats, Chuck and Houdini going live after every single UC football game. Sources also tell me they're going live from the arena on Friday night at the end of Ohio State UC exhibition game. So be sure to check that out. Chatterbox Bearcats on YouTube, live after every game. Also available everywhere you get podcasts. They're doing some midweek podcasts. Talk a lot about the hoop season. UC, of course, ranked in the top 25. So they're doing a great job. So be sure to check all of that out. All that stuff is in the episode notes below. If you could, be sure to like the stream if you're watching on YouTube. If you're on podcast form, subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Leave us a 5-star review. We'd really appreciate that. All right. Well, until next time, Nick Kirby, Austin Layton, hope you have a great day. And always, and most importantly, go Reds.